All right, while this loads, this will be the second lecture for week 5 we're in already? Wow. Regaining muscular strength, endurance, and power. What I did for this lecture and the next lecture is I actually did take a lot of the book PowerPoint that comes with the textbook for the instructor and tweak it a little bit here and there because why reinvent the wheel? There's actually some good stuff there. So today we'll discuss some A&P, anatomy, physiology, skeletal muscle, define some of these different terms: strength, endurance, power, why they're important as part of a rehabilitation program. You'll see me abbreviate rehabilitation as rehab a lot. So introduction. After all musculoskeletal injuries, right, some degree of impairment of muscular strength and endurance occurs. Muscular strength is the ability of a muscle to generate force against some kind of resistance. That could be, a dumbbell, a free weight, which would be a dumbbell, TheraBand, a pulley of some kind, right? And muscular endurance is the ability to perform repetitive muscular contraction against some resistance for a period of time. So now we're adding that time element in with endurance. You have 3 basic types of muscle contraction. You have isometric, concentric, and eccentric muscle contraction, right? The eccentric, I think, is one of the ones I did a lot of research with when I was doing my master's degree, but we'll go in order here. Isometric, so when muscle contracts to produce tension, but there's no change of muscle length. Bam. Wall, my left hand here is the wall, right fist, bam. Muscles producing tension, but there's no change in the muscle length. That's my biceps, some forearm muscles. Concentric, the muscle shortens in length while tension increases to overcome or remove some resistance. iPhone is not very heavy, right? If I do a biceps curl with my iPhone, I'm overcoming some very minimal resistance, right? Versus if I was to pick up this whole desk that this laptop's on, I probably wouldn't be able to do that these days, right? So it's concentric, shortening. And then eccentric, the resistance is greater than the muscular force being produced, and the muscle lengthens while producing tension. So that is usually during the deceleration phase of muscle contraction. All right. This eccentric is a relatively new term, past 3 to 5 years, I'd say. It combines a controlled concentric and concurrent eccentric contraction to the same muscle over 2 separate joints. And you can only use this term when that muscle crosses 2 joints. Hamstring curl. So prone hamstring curl, because your hamstrings, hip, and knee, right? I wouldn't worry too much about this term. These 3, understand those, please. Muscle size and muscle strength. So muscle strength is proportional to the cross-sectional diameter of the muscle fiber. Greater the diameter, the bigger the muscle, right? Greater the diameter of the cross-sectional diameter of the muscle fiber, the bigger the muscle will be. The stronger the contraction will also be as well. So the size of the muscle tends to increase with resistance training. We call that hypertrophy. So resistance training, you're going and working out in the weight room, all right? You're building muscle due to hypertrophy. The size of the muscle tends to increase with resistance training. Your muscles should not decrease in size when you're actually doing resistance training, right? Number of muscle fibers there. The larger the number of fibers a person will have, potential to hypertrophy versus someone with relatively few fibers, right? So this is kind of genetic predisposition as well. Larger number of fibers a person will have, they will have a greater potential to hypertrophy versus someone who has relatively fewer fibers. Right? So elite athletes probably have a larger number of fibers, right, versus sedentary individuals, or I'll go to an extreme here, maybe an obese individual, right? Neuromuscular efficiency. The body wants to move efficiently. It wants to make the most power and strength in the most efficient manner possible, if that makes sense. So a lot of these skills that you learn as a specific sport skill, that is that neuromuscular efficiency for that specific task. whether it's, changing your angle of your shot if you're a basketball player, changing your grip for a golfer, changing your footing when you're a baseball player or a football player, right? So strength is directly related to neuromuscular efficiency and motor function of motor units producing that muscular force. So initial increases in strength during the first 8 to 10 weeks of a resistance program is usually due to increased neuromuscular efficiency, right? Your body increases the number of motor units being recruited, increases the firing rate of each motor unit, it increases the synchronization of the motor unit firing. So therefore, because those three things are happening, right? Bam, bam, bam. Your body becomes more efficient. And this is with resistance training. So it's like a strength program, right? Training program. Within the first 2 to 2.5 months, you usually see changes. 8 to 10 weeks, not that, in all honesty, that long of a period of time. But in today's society, unfortunately, people want everything now, right? They want that text message now. They want that email now. Instant gratification. So a lot of times, individuals stop working out after a week because they're not seeing that initial gain. Their body's not becoming more toned. It's not becoming stronger. At least they don't think it is, but it really is. Some biomechanical considerations, and this is not a biomechanics class. You guys will have some of that stuff throughout the program here. But the position of the tendon attachment actually is important here. So like I wrote biceps. This is the example your book uses. Your biceps, bam, radial tuberosity, biceps, long head goes up to your superior glenoid rim of your labrum. Short head goes over here to your coracoid process. Right? Two heads for the biceps. But it starts down here at your radial tuberosity. That does flexion of the elbow, and it does supination. Supination, right? So if attachment is closer to the fulcrum, which would be my elbow joint, patient produces a greater effort with the muscle than if it was further away, because the arm length will be a greater length, right? So if now my biceps was here, if you can see, right? If my biceps was halfway down my forearm now, instead of distal here, actually proximal, I should say, proximal, here, right, at the radial tuberosity, now it feels more distal, that's what I wanted to say. It feels about halfway down the body, down the forearm here. That's going to be a little bit different of an angle, right? Further away, produce greater effort. When this becomes important is safety and weightlifting and lifting techniques. So if you were to take a box full of whatever, nothing too heavy, and pick it up way out here in front of you, that's going to be a lot heavier than it would be if it's flush against your body. You pick it up and hold it against your body, right? Same thing here, but now we're talking about tendon attachments. And again, this biomechanical considerations, even with this length-tension relationship, you're going to have a lot more later on in the program about this. So I'm just kind of planting seeds right now. Right, so length-tension relationship determines tension that can be generated within the muscle. And I have a picture on the next slide here. At the beginning of the curve, here, right, muscle is shortened. At the end of curve, muscle is lengthened. Greatest tension is within the middle of the curve. Why? And this says resting length. Don't worry about this. I got this off the internet because I couldn't find actually the picture in the textbook. Cross bridges between actin and myosin myofilaments within the sarcomere is at its maximum. So therefore, it's at the greatest tension in the middle of the curve, right? At the beginning of the curve, shortened, lengthened. So theoretically, you could probably say it's concentric, that's eccentric. That's the strongest point. Interesting. Age. As we age, you know what happens probably, just without thinking much into it. As we age, we get a little weaker, right? So the ability to generate muscular force is related to age. Men and women increase strength throughout their puberty, adolescence, peaks around age 20 to 25 years, right? So probably where you guys are at right now, a lot of you. After about 25, you lose about 1% of max strength each year. So once you hit 25, it all goes downhill. I say once you hit 30, it kind of goes all downhill, but I'm kidding. Now again, loss of strength is related to physical activity. So if you're a sedentary individual who never really had that strength anyways, and now as you're hitting your early 30s, mid 30s, you're going to lose that muscle a little faster. And if you're not active, you're going to lose it faster, right? But now, say if you're a recreationally active individual, you might go to the a gym, you might run recreationally, play a couple sports, tennis, golf, ski, whatever it is. That loss of strength won't be as rapid, right? So that's why you see a lot of senior citizens and older individuals exercising. They have group fitness classes for senior citizens. They have a lot more. PTs do this a lot. They have a lot more classes that older individuals can take to make them not necessarily generate muscle to become a professional bodybuilder, but they're generating muscle to maintain physical fitness. And that's a big thing throughout the lifespan now. Overtraining, I saw this a lot. I actually don't see it as much with the dancers that I treat, the dance population that I treat, but you see this a lot with distance runners, track, field, cross-country people. So overtraining can cause a negative effect on development of muscular strength. Is essentially imbalance between exercise and recovery. So training program exceeds body's physiological and psychological limits. This can result in injury, fatigue, or even sickness. Right? So we actually see this a lot freshman year of college, that athletes coming in from high school, they're not used to exercising as much, maybe working out, especially if they're a major or a high level athlete, let's say Division 1 athlete versus Division 3. Essentially Division 1, George Mason Division 1 institution, a lot of these athletes are there year round, they're weightlifting year round, they're in a strength program year round, etc. So as a freshman, you come into this, you're not used to this, you could exceed and overtrain, and you'll notice a lot of freshmen are sick a lot. It's interesting. All right, muscle fibers. Some of this, all of this should be reviewed from anatomy and physiology. I'm not going to lie, right? Even exercise physiology. So type 1, most resistant to fatigue. So type 1 fibers or slow twitch fibers, they're most resistant to fatigue. The time required to generate force is much greater. So we associate these type 1 fibers with long duration aerobic activities. So in your heads, what type of activities can you think that are, long duration and aerobic? What does that mean? What does that word aerobic mean? Because the next one is anaerobic, right? Fast twitch, capable of producing a quick, forceful contraction, but these fatigue rapidly. They're useful in short-term, high-intensity activities that involve the anaerobic system. What does that mean? Type 2A and type 2B. That type 2B should be capitalized there, that last, yeah. So type 2A is moderately resistant to fatigue, and type 2B fatigues rapidly. And then we have a type 2X that actually did not include in here. So you can see here, ratio of these in the muscle, the ratio of these two varies per person, and because ratio is genetically determined, it can play a larger role in determining ability for a given sport or activity. Sprinters and weightlifters will probably have larger percentage of fast twitch fibers versus a marathon runner might have a larger percentage of slow twitch fibers. So if you look at like the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon, all these individuals that win these marathons, where are they from? Nigeria, right? Other countries like that, they have genetic predisposition for slow twitch fibers. If you look, sometimes it's a family lineage of where these kids come from. I say kids, they're probably older than me, but adults, whoever you want to call them, these marathon runners come from. It's crazy. If you look at like professional sports, baseball, if you can consider baseball a sport, they run 90 feet. They're usually a little out of shape. I kid because I played baseball. But if you look at other athletes, like other sports like football, a lot of like current NFL players, their fathers or their mothers, maybe even both, were athletes, elite athletes, Division 1 athletes, maybe professional sports, or even Olympic athletes. It's It's crazy. Speaking about Olympics, a girl from my hometown, Jen um, Stasinski, is the Olympic gold medal winner for pole vault. I actually treated Jen back in the day when I first um, was working at a PT clinic. She had a lot of low back issues. She was still in college actually too, at Roberts Wesleyan, right, in Rochester. But she had some low back issues, had some quality issues, and yeah. So she is going for her third Olympic medal right now. She's got a silver 8 years ago, 4 years ago, she got a gold medal, and she's the #1 pole vaulter in the world. Kind of random, huh? But muscle hypertrophy, we'll stay on track here. Resistance training improves muscular strength. So the increase in the number of muscle fibers as a result of fibers splitting in response to training. We call this hyperplasia. But if you look at the last slide, right, genetically predetermined as well. Our book talks about how much blood is required to supply the muscle with oxygen, nutrients, and then it also talks about, well, there's no new capillaries that are formed during resistance training, so that's kind of a myth. So a lot of this stuff is really more of a strength and conditioning principle so far than necessarily a rehabilitation principle, right? Some of these things you're not going to use, 2 days after the patient gets injured. You're going to use this, as they're functionally returning back to play or activity or sport, whatever they're doing their job or whatever it is, right? So myofilaments, again, this should be reviewed, but the contractile elements of protein within a sarcomere. When the muscle is stimulated to contract, these cross bridges pull myofilaments together, right? Cross bridges pull myofilaments together, shortening the muscle and producing that movement at that specific joint that muscle crosses. This can cause hypertrophy because we're building muscle. We're strengthening that muscle through movement. The overload principle, simple. For a muscle to improve its strength, it must be forced to work at a higher level than it's accustomed to. If I take my iPhone again, and I keep doing biceps curls with my iPhone, and I'm like, why is my biceps not getting big? Well, my iPhone, how much does this thing weigh? A pound? Come on, that's not enough, right? Force to overcome that I'm accustomed to, right? But if I go pick up, a stack of my books here on my bookshelf here, if I go pick up, 15 of those books and I start doing a biceps curl, that's probably actually going to be enough weight that I'm like, okay, that's a lot more than my iPhone. Overload principle, basic. You must overload the muscle for strength to be gained. Right? Resistance exercise is based upon overload and progression in AT and athletic training, right? The progressive overload is limited by the healing process. That's what I just said a couple minutes ago. If you're too aggressive too early, you can cause further injury. And I think most young athletic trainers, you guys will probably fall into this trap too. I know I did when I was first out of college, grad school. You'll fall into this a little bit because you want to be aggressive. You have a coach or, that patient in your ear that, hey, I want to get back for this game, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to work with them and you may push them a little bit too hard. So it's a balance of, your expertise and your, as you get more patient care experiences to really handle the not going too aggressive with that patient. With functional strength training, this is using the entire kinetic chain to increase functional strength. This is the good stuff, right? This takes into account plane of motion, body position, base of support, upper lower body symmetry, balance, form of resistance. Very practical in working with physically active patients. This uses concentric, eccentric, even isometric contractions at the same time. So on page 251 of your textbook, there are a bunch of photos. I actually deleted out of here for some reason when I downloaded it because I didn't like the formatting. Isometric exercise, I've talked to this to death, I feel like, but provides stabilization strength. This maintains normal length tension and force couple relationships. Strength is only increased at that specific angle of exertion. Bam, it's only strengthening at this angle. If I'm pushing down on my desk right now, it's strengthening my triceps, right? Only at this angle. With isometric exercise, you actually have to be careful if the patient has high blood pressure already, which you'll see a lot more these days, especially in overweight athletes. This is picking on them, but offensive linemen in football, shot putters, right? When you picture them, they're not like that lead muscular individual. They're more of an average individual or sometimes overweight, right? So that blood pressure spike can cause some issues. They may pass out. They might, have some other actually aneurysms or brain issues, brain bleeds, herniations. And Valsalva's maneuver. You'll hear about Valsalva's maneuver in eval classes, but essentially all it is you're holding your breath, and exerting force to increase your intrathecal pressure, which is the pressure within your spinal cord. It's useful for if you think a patient has a disc herniation of their, really any part of their lumbar, thoracic, or really any part of their spine. So essentially, it's very odd talking to the patient about this. You guys will laugh at me. I think Marcy, actually, I'm not sure who's teaching her eval classes, but I'm sure they'll explain it this way. Act like you're going to the bathroom. Act like you're pottying, right? So a lot of people, when they go to the bathroom, they exert a force, right? And they push down, and that is essentially Valsalva's maneuver. I typically don't say that to a patient. I say, okay, act like you're blowing up a balloon, but don't let any air out of your mouth, right? So you guys try Valsalva's maneuver at home right now in the privacy of your own home. With isometric exercise, we usually hold the contraction about 10 seconds. PREs, or progressive resistance exercises. This is what we use the most in therapeutic exercise rehabilitation, right? These uses exercises that strengthen muscles through a contraction that overcomes some type of fixed resistance. Dumbbells, barbells, machines, tubing, whatever you want. Isotonic contractions, concentric, eccentric is going on. Concentric versus eccentric. This is really, I don't know, mainly eccentric stuff, but isotonic contractions can be either con or E, right? Concentric, eccentric, con, or eccentric, E, right? Eccentrics can generate greater amounts of force, basically because they require much lower levels of motor unit activity. They're less resistant to fatigue, and like I said, they're critical for deceleration of a limb motion. So our book talks about a baseball pitcher, right? You throw the pitch, once the ball's released, you're slowing your arm down. There's some studies out there that your arm's moving about 8,000 degrees per second in a Major League Baseball player. That's crazy. So how much eccentric strength does it take to slow down your arm from a pitching motion? Now imagine a Major League Baseball player, he does that 100 times every 5 days, plus all the warm-up pitches, plus the bullpen. That's a lot of deceleration. No wonder why they always have labrums, rotator cuff issues, all that stuff, right? Rehab programs must incorporate both concentric and eccentric exercise to be maximally effective. Hamstring strains, you're going to see them. You're going to see a ton of them. Don't just do concentrics. They will be right back in your athletic training facility 2 weeks later because they re-injured their hamstring. Do eccentrics. Okay, free weights versus exercise machines. Every book out there on rehab talks about this stuff, and it's a lot more strength and conditioning principles. But anywho, exercise machines, you use on a Nautilus or whatever the machine might be. They're a lot safer to use compared to free weights, but the design really limits you to one plane of motion depending on the machine. It's a lot safer to change weight because you usually have just to pull the pin out, put the pin back in where you want it, and you can go on with doing your machine workout, right? Free weights require spotters or partners at times. Maybe you as an AT will have to spot for them. But you can create a lot more functional activities or exercises with them that are a little more dangerous, but if you teach the patient how to properly use them, you're usually fine. So what do you guys think about machines and versus free weight exercises? Not even exercises, I should say. What do you think about machines versus free weights? Everyone has an opinion. What is yours? Some of these terms that are pretty big here with progressive resistance, you have repetitions or reps. You've probably heard these terms a bunch, but now they're just defining them for you, right? Reps is the number of times a specific movement is repeated, usually 10 to 12, 8 to 12 really. Repetition maximum, or RM, the maximum number of reps at a given weight. A set is a particular number of repetitions. So if I do 10 reps at 2 sets, I've done the exercise 20 times, right? The intensity is the amount of weight or resistance lifted. Recovery period is the rest interval between sets. And then the frequency is the number of times an exercise is done in 1 week's period. And you can define that week's period, is it Sunday through Saturday? Is it Tuesday through Tuesday, Monday, whatever it is. You can define that at your facility. More techniques for resistance training. You have a single set, which consists of one set of 8 to 12 repetitions of a particular exercise performed at a slow speed. Typically how we do things, right? Some of these other terms are very much, I think, more strength and conditioning principles than rehabilitation principles. This trisets, group of 3 exercises for the same muscle group, perform 2 to 4 sets, using no rest in between. Multiple sets, 2 to 3 warm-up sets with progressively increasing resistance, followed by several sets of the same resistance. Interesting. Some of you guys that have worked out a lot may have actually used some of these. I don't know. Supersets back in the 80s, 90s, I feel like this was very popular, but supersets, either one set of 8 to 10 reps of a specific exercise for the same muscle group performed one after another, or several sets, 8 to 10 reps of 2 exercises for the same muscle group with no rest in between. A pyramid is one set of 8 to 12 reps with light resistance, then an increase in resistance over 4 to 6 sets until only 1 or 2 reps can be performed. You can do this in the opposite way. You can go heavy to light versus light to heavy. All right, so you start with the heavier weight and go to the lighter one. Pyramids is an interesting thing as well. Split routine and circuit training. So split routine workouts exercise different muscle groups on successive days. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, let's say you're going to do upper body. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you're going to do lower body, and Sunday's your day off. You see that a lot with circuit training. Series of exercise stations that includes weight training, flexibility, calisthenics, and more. You actually see with circuit training a lot more with a lot of the group fitness classes, a lot of the older individuals that do like a senior wellness class. They go through some type of circuit training. All right. Some of these things you're not ever probably going to use. I'm not going to lie. So we're going to go through these pretty quick. Resistance training used during rehabilitation. That is the LORM program, which is based on the repetition maximum of 10. Page 256, table 9.2 in your textbook, you have a chart in there. And I didn't include all these. Every one of these techniques we're talking about has a chart. 3 sets for the LORM program. First at 50% of your 10 rep max. Then at the third set, you're doing 100% of your 10 rep max. So it's an interesting program. The Oxford technique is the opposite. So your first set, you're doing as much as you can, 100% of your 10 rep max, versus the last set, your third set, you're doing 50%, right? The Sanders program is designed to be used in advanced stages of rehab programs. This uses the percentage of body weight to determine starting weight for the exercise you're doing. So you take a calculation depending on how much the patient weighs, and that'll give you your starting weight to give the patient. I actually tried some of the Sanders stuff back in the day when I worked football in West Virginia, and to me it was actually more of a pain trying to figure out some of the stuff than the gains that the patient got. Again, a lot of strength and conditioning principles here. This DAPER stuff, actually found by Ken Knight, who's an athletic trainer, daily adjusted progressive resistance exercises, DAPER, whatever you want to call it, allows for individual differences in the rates of progress, and this can be useful. I think it's probably more useful than others listed on the previous slide, and this is on page 257 of your book, and it lists a nice chart in there. I don't know. I guess I don't use it as much. Isokinetics. Back in the 80s, early 90s, this was the hot thing to do. All right, involves a muscle contraction in which the length of the muscle is changing while velocity is constant. So they're hooked up to a machine, a biodex. Back, like I said, in the 80s and early 90s, this was a conditioning tool. They used it in rehab. They would actually weight train on this thing. Nobody does that anymore. I would say very few people do that anymore. Excellent use for research. I used it for my master's thesis because I set the speed. So we did 60 degrees per second and 180 degrees per second. We looked at hamstring strength, concentrically and eccentrically, and then quadricep strength eccentrically and concentrically. We compared ratios. We compared healthy leg versus injured leg. We compared, joint angles. Okay, 20 degrees, they had this much strength, and at 70 degrees, they had this much strength. So it is good for research. Clinically, Plyometric exercise, I believe your textbook here has a whole chapter in plyometrics. So these are exercises that encompass a rapid stretch of a muscle eccentrically, followed by rapid concentric contraction. You develop a forceful, explosive movement. So the greater the stretch of the muscle before the contraction or concentric contraction, the greater the resistance the muscle can overcome. Most people have done some type of plyometric exercise, especially if they're athletes. The bad part about this is this can put a great deal of stress on your body. I believe in that chapter they'll talk a lot about foot contacts and your age and how much is appropriate for plyometric exercises, because you can actually cause some stress reaction and damage your tissues a little bit with too much plyos. Core stabilization strengthening, this should be a fundamental component for all injury rehab programs. The core, they classifies the lumbopelvic hip complex. A lot of people don't like that word core. I'm kind of indifferent to it. It's whatever to me. Help improve dynamic postural control, which we'll talk about, I believe, next lecture. Appropriate muscular balance and joint movement, improve neuromuscular efficiency, and more, right? So with that lumbopelvic hip complex, if you have a dysfunction within here, you could have decrease in dynamic postural control, decrease in proprioception, muscular balance, joint movement, inefficient core muscle strength can lead to injury. So your extremities, your arms, legs, whatever, might be very strong, but if your core is weak or inefficient, it cannot overcome the resistance and then thus can become injured. Believe you actually have a whole chapter on open versus closed kinetic chain. And as you go through body parts with Marcy, you guys will be exposed to open and closed kinetic chain exercises throughout your next really 2 semesters, really next year in the program. So closed kinetic chain, your foot or hand is in contact with the ground or wall, right? Functional activities, your foot's on the ground or hand is in a weight-bearing position. Most things we do functionally, your body's in contact with something, right? If you're a golfer, your hand's in contact with a club. Tennis player, your hand's in contact with a racket. Your feet are almost always on the ground. What sport are your feet never in contact with the ground? Swimming, I guess. Open kinetic, I guess. I don't know. Open kinetic chain, your foot, hand is not in contact with the ground, wall, etc. Usually we use open kinetic chain more during the beginning stages of rehabilitation program, especially after post-surgical patients. Big thing here is joint angles can change with open versus closed kinetic exercises. So let's take your tib fib for an example. So your tibia fibula, I actually wore workout clothes in today. So your tib fib, right? This is my tibia. All right. So your tib fib, when you're not in contact with the ground, it actually does some external rotation and some torsion. You'll actually learn a little bit about the screw home mechanism in lower body. You might have actually learned about an A&P, but probably not. Versus when my foot's in contact with the ground now, and say I'm doing a squat, that rotation could still be there, but it's subtle, right? So there's going to be some subtle changes in joint angles. That's it. I mean, I feel like the book actually doesn't do a great job necessarily with this chapter. I feel like there's some basic terms thrown out at you. Other than that, there's just, I don't think it does a great job of talking about a lot about the rehab techniques. It talks a lot more about the strength and conditioning principles to me, but it's a good basic understanding of what you need to know, I think. So your next lecture will be a little bit about postural control and proprioception. It'll be a little longer than this as well.